Joshua, and I'm here to dispel a myth about Scribe Online connectors. They're not hard to build, they're very easy, they can be very fast, and you can get them deployed and get to working on your solution very quickly. And that's what Connector Outlaws is all about. It's about building your connector, getting it out there, and doing it quickly and fast. Hello, welcome back. I'm Joshua Solomon, and welcome to another episode of Connector Outlaws. Today we're going to talk about metadata. We've talked about metadata a little bit in some other videos that we've done, but today we're going to talk about metadata as it relates both to the CDK and to the FAST framework. All right, as we talked about before, there are four main components to every connector. Whether you're working with CDK or with the FAST framework, you have to work with connection information, metadata information, queries, and operations. And today we're going to talk about metadata and how to get metadata to your connector. Okay, so let's jump right in and we'll talk about the CDK and its metadata. So when you're working with the CDK, you define your metadata in the Metadata Provider interface that we've given you in the Connector Development Kit. We've talked about that before. We're going to show it a little bit more here today. There are cons and pros to both sides. The con is when you're working with the CDK and you're building metadata in it, it can be a manual process. It can be difficult. Sometimes there's a lot of metadata to deal with. But the pro side is it can be dynamic. If your API has discovery methods, you can discover that metadata and then just iterate through it without having to do any manual coding. So there's two different ways you can do it there, and we're going to talk about both ways here in just a second. So with the CDK, you've seen this screenshot a couple of times already. We have to define the entities as object definitions. And this screenshot, again, we talk about the name, the full name, the description, whether or not this entity is going to be hidden from the connector or from the user who's using the connector, relationships, properties, etc. And the property definitions in themselves are a separate list of definitions. And here are the list of properties. So when you're defining a property, you get the field name, the full description, the type of the property, integer, string, etc., whether it's nullable, whether it's a key that's defined in the API, etc. So what we're going to do is we're going to very quickly talk about where this information is actually located in your connector when you're working with the Connector Development Kit. So I'm going to tab out to my SMTP connector, and we can see here, again, another screenshot we've seen before. This is the connector interface, and within the connector interface, there are multiple methods. We have our connect and disconnect, we have our executes, our execute operation, execute query, but we also have the get metadata provider. And within this get metadata provider, you define an metadata provider. And so I'm going to very quickly switch over to my metadata provider, and we can see here my metadata provider is defined as an metadata provider interface, and we have our get object definition. And within our get object definition, what I'm doing is I'm manually typing in every object name and every field that's going to go with this SMTP connector. So it's an email object, there's a to field, there's a subject, a body, a result, and a resulting message. So I've defined the fields that we're going to populate within the connector, and I've done this manually using the same format that I showed you in the PowerPoint screen. I've literally typed out every one of these. And so here, within our get object definition within the metadata provider, is where you would make a call. Instead of hard coding it the way I have here, you would make a call to your API. Again, go back to our API evaluation video where we determine whether or not your API has discovery methods. If you have discovery methods, you would call that discovery method here, and you would iterate through the object definitions and the property definitions, and you'd have your metadata all defined and ready for your Connector Development Kit. So let's go back to our PowerPoint, and we'll talk about something that's even easier than that. So metadata is simple when you think about it. It can be difficult acquiring that metadata if you don't have discovery methods or if you have to manually type those things out. But with our FAST framework, as we've discussed before, there are some unique opportunities that you can have with REST APIs to build fast framework connectors. And these fast framework connectors can be very easy to build if you know what you're doing. So with the fast framework metadata, there are also a couple of cons and pros to it. One con is when you're building fast framework entities, every entity has to have its own class. So if you think about it, if you're building a fast framework connector, you can have dozens of entities that you want to support, but you're going to have a separate class for each one of those. Not really a big deal because of the pro. The pro here is we can simply paste as JSON into these classes, and bing, we have our metadata almost instantaneously. It's literally a cut and paste operation. So let's talk about how we can do that in the fast framework. I am going to tab out to my Postman environment. This is the environment that I use to test out REST calls when I'm building connectors. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a mortgage rate calculating post here, and I'm going to hit send on it. And so what I've done is I've hit a public API that calculates mortgage rates based on Zillow's estimate of mortgage rates in individual states. And what I got in return from this post is a JSON message. And so I'm going to take that JSON message and copy it. And so this message has all of the information that I need about this mortgage rate. And it also has all the information I need to build metadata for this REST call into a connector. Now I'm going to tab into my sample Zillow connector, one of our Scribe Outlaw Scribe Labs connector that you can have access to the source code for. And we've already got a class for mortgage rate calculation, but I'm going to show you how we built it. I'm actually going to add a new class to my project. It's just going to be a blank class, as you can see here. And where we have our Zillow entity classes namespace automatically defined for us, I'm going to take and overwrite this class definition and come up here to edit and paste special and paste JSON as classes. And so what I just took in from my clipboard was a result from the Zillow mortgage calculator for the state of New Hampshire. And I'm going to paste it in here as a class, which is a feature of Visual Studio. And you can see that what it has done is it's created several classes from my JSON result, and that is my metadata. What happens is the FAST framework and the FAST framework API iterates over each one of these entity classes and builds the object for you so that you don't have to do anything. Now, in looking at this, the only type of item here, property here that is not supported by the FAST framework is this metadata property here. So I'm going to comment that out, and just like that, I have my metadata for my Zillow connection. So I can rename these objects. So I have a couple of objects. I have a result object here, Zillow entity classes. And I can come over here and build out my FAST framework call. This is the REST call that we talked about with Fuzz Schroeder in an earlier episode. And you can see that I've simply told it to make this call and enumerate the response as a mortgage calc root object. And so if I come over here to my mortgage calc class and open that up, you will see that it looks very familiar. It looks exactly like the class that I just built, and in fact it's identical. But what I did do was I changed the identifier of the object that I want to come back to be mortgage calc instead of result. So now it's a more readable version of the JSON that I pasted in earlier, and that readable version is simply iterated over by the FAST framework using this single call. So explanation-wise, it may be a little bit more difficult to talk about how the FAST framework deals with metadata, but you can see that all I really had to do was cut and paste metadata from a JSON result in order to get my metadata into my FAST framework. So, a couple of different ways to do metadata. That's how we do it with the FAST framework, and that's how we do it with the Connector Development Kit. Here is a link to the Scribe CDK online help. It actually includes 2 sections, one for the CDK, one for the FAST framework, and you're welcome to go there, download samples, and give it a try for yourself. Thank you very much.